Tesla's Attic, chapters 23, 24, and 25. Chapter 23. Bonk. One might expect that the announcement of the end of the world would bring about widespread panic and the looting of electronics stores, but such wholesale chaos takes time to come to a boil. Celestial object Felicity Bonk was like that unexpected relative who calls to announce she's coming for a visit just as her car pulls into the driveway, leaving you no time to so much as clean the house. The world was ending on Monday. Period. The end. As soon as the announcement went public, places of worship were packed with souls seeking salvation. But movie theaters were also packed by people who wanted one last escape into someone else's reality. When it comes to facing the end of the world, there is no wrong way to do it, except perhaps for the guy, in fine Archimedes fashion, ran naked through Colorado Springs Museum Cactus Garden. It wasn't Eureka he was shouting, however. The weekend airwaves were full of blameful pundits accusing world governments of either A, hiding the truth, or B, being too inept to know the truth before it was too late. But in the end, blame didn't matter. This was going down. No amount of warning could have stopped it or changed the outcome. Felicity Bonk was huge and fast, and regardless of where on the globe you stood, would be putting your lights out at 5:19 p.m. Mountain Time, give or take a minute. Monday morning found Colorado Springs in an odd state of heightened normalcy. School buses ran, paper boys biked their routes, patrons of the new Starbucks downtown lamented all the TV shows they would never see the conclusions of. When faced with the end of all things, it was much easier to nibble at it than take a large, indigestible bite. By and large, people went about their Monday morning business as usual, but because what else could they do? Surprisingly, about half of the students showed up at Nick's school because their parents claimed they needed time to prepare, as if the end of the world required careful planning and well-packed luggage. Under the circumstances, Nick's math teacher announced first period, Friday's test has been canceled. Several kids reflexively cheered, not quite getting that the test wasn't canceled. Friday was. To his credit, the math teacher was devoted to his subject, and they spent the hour calculating the speed and trajectory of the asteroid, while the more advanced students tried to project how many pieces the Earth would split into. The general consensus was 16. Nick's English teacher chose to read them Goodnight Moon, then have them ponder its profundity in silence. And Nick's social studies teacher, Mr. Brown, drank Jack Daniels straight from the bottle, laughed a lot, and kept saying, "What are they going to do, fire me?" To Nick's chagrin, Caitlin wasn't in school. She was at home, at her parents' request, and she had also turned off her phone at her parents' request, because they did not want their daughter to spend her last day on Earth engaged in inane conversation, as they called it, and so instead Caitlin busied herself with her own form of coping. She frantically scanned and uploaded artwork, photos, and other bits and pieces of her life to the cloud, fixed on the irrational belief that even after the Earth was gone, the cloud would remain. Mitch wasn't in school either. He chose to spend the day in bed, and his mother let him. He didn't sleep, however. Instead, he tried to live his entire life in a single day. He closed his eyes and imagined everything. He would graduate from Yale. Why not? Get a law degree from Harvard. Why not? He would prosecute the creeps who put his father in jail and get them the death penalty. Why not? He would also marry Petula Grabowski Jones, who, once she grew out of her awkward phase, would become a top supermodel. Admittedly, he was pushing it. In his fantasy, Mitch found and returned all those stolen virtual pennies, and the banks were so grateful that they let him keep half the money. With the $375 million, he bought his own island, from which he launched spacecraft for fun and profit. He could have died a very old, very happy man that day, except for one thing, the shut up and listen, which he had brought back home with him from Nick's house, had begun acting weirder than usual. As for Vince, his quick and painless death had allowed him to avoid all the unpleasantness. which was a shame, really, because more than anyone, Vince would have enjoyed watching the world end. His mother, no longer as cheerful as her house, yet still incapable of being as somber as her son had been, clipped every last award winning flower from her garden and filled her home with wreaths of living color, saving a single rose which she brought to the mortuary to lay on Vince's chest. She chose the one with the most thorns because she knew that's what he would have wanted. One might argue the importance of the large, earth shattering moments in history. Few people realize that destiny turns not on the large moments, but on the tiny ones that go unnoticed. The moment Captain E.J. Smith chose to leave the Titanic's engines at full speed ahead before retiring for the night, the moment Albert Einstein decided enough was enough and quit his dead end job at the patent office, the moment Sir Isaac Newton, tired of the sun in his eyes, said, "What the heck? I'll sit under this apple tree." The small, unobserved moment which led to a final and literally earth shattering event was the moment Nick Slate decided to have a garage sale. It was obvious to Nick that the asteroid had been pulled here by his brother's Mitt, because, in spite of the revolution and rotation of the Earth, its impact point was calculated to be the very same sports complex where Danny had wished upon stars. Had Nick left the attic alone, his brother would have never used the mitt. Throughout the day, Nick couldn't keep himself from looking around and beating himself silly with the inescapable fact that all this would be gone because of him. Could things have been any worse if the Accelerati possessed all of Tesla's inventions? Long before the end of the school day, most parents had gotten over their initial denial and came to pick their kids up. Nick's father was no exception. He, Danny, and Nick spent the afternoon together. At 4:30, less than an hour before the end, Mr. Slate was barbecuing steaks he had been saving for next weekend. Inside, the TV was tuned to an impromptu Twilight Zone marathon rather than the news, which seemed preoccupied with various celebrity end of the world parties. Nick considered his brother, who sat at the patio table looking somewhat bored by this whole end of the world business. Does he know? Wondered Nick. Has he figured out that his mitt brought all this about? Danny, he asked. His brother lifted his head. Nick opened his mouth to say something, but then he realized there was nothing he could say. If his brother knew, there was no way to comfort him. And if he didn't know, there was no reason to burden him. What? Are you going to tell me you love me like Dad's been doing all day? When Nick didn't answer, Danny looked down and made a fist. You know what? I'm glad, he said, because it means we get to go see Mom sooner. Nick couldn't help going over to Danny to give him perhaps the biggest hug he'd ever given him. You got it right, Danny. Danny shrugged. If it was just me, I'd be afraid of dying, but since it's everybody, I'm not. Isn't that weird? Nick just grinned at him. Why don't you help Dad with the steaks? Danny got up to join his father at the grill, and Nick went up to his bedroom and tried to find at least some of the perspective that his little brother had. But he couldn't lie down in his happy place anymore because there in the center of the attic were all the objects that he and Caitlin had collected. They were still arranged to form a partially complete contraption. Whatever it was, whatever it didn't matter now. Nick would never find out. As he stared at it, a sense of anger built up inside of him. All that had happened, all that he had been through, everything he had sought to solve was now meaningless. How could Tesla have been so foolish to leave these things for an unsuspecting world to find? Or perhaps that was his intention, a last cruel joke on the world that had refused to recognize and reward his brilliance. Nick should have burned these things when he had the chance, but it wasn't too late to destroy them. Not with the force of an asteroid, but the force of his own two hands. He scanned the room, and in the corner he spotted the baseball bat, the only object that he and Caitlin couldn't find a place for in the cluster of curious objects. He hefted the bat and looked at the stack in the center of the room. Here's for all the teams I've never played on. Here's for the girl I'll never kiss. Here's for the man I'll never get to be. Here's for the stinking Accelerati. And here's for Vince. And then with all the fury he could muster, he raised the bat, tensed his arms, and leaned back, ready to swing away. When word made it through Petula's Nick-related misery that all human history was about to be history, she took it personally. How dare the universe end her existence at this most awful of moments? Once she learned the precise day and time of the doomsday clock, she went out to the backyard exactly 24 hours before to snap a picture of the end of the world. Then she went to Ms. Plank's house to develop it. Miss Plank was not home, so Petula had to force her way in through a basement window. Upon developing the picture, it proved the truth of the inevitable. The image taken in her own backyard did not show a backyard. It showed flames and chunks of semi-molten stone flying in all directions. The camera did not lie. This was indeed the end of the planet Earth. Until she saw the picture, it hadn't been real for Petula, but the truth drove her heart in a way the golden spike had not. At home, her parents were satisfied to yell at each other, trying to squeeze a life's worth of bickering into what little time they had left. Now she would die without ever having Nick's affection. Her only consolation was that Nick would be dead too. To cheer herself up, Petula spent the rest of the evening making a list of all the people she'd be happy were dead, from despicable dictators to all those annoying people who ride side by side in the bike lane like they own the road. Sequestered in her room, she had no way of knowing that Ms. Plank had come across her negative of the end of the world, and she had her own thoughts on the matter. Petula did not attend school on Monday morning because there was no one in particular she wanted to see, or say a fond farewell to. The house was fairly quiet since her parents were not talking to each other. Hemorrhoid, blissfully ignorant, was satisfied to gnaw on a rubber bone, which was probably what he would do in doggy heaven for all eternity. Petula asked herself the question, if I only had one day left to live, what would I do? She had asked herself the question as a hypothetical many times before, and her hypothetical answers were always lofty and self-sacrificing, like feeding orphans or comforting the elderly. In reality, however, all she really wanted to do before the world ended was watch the original 3 Star Wars movies. She calculated that the asteroid would be merciful and the end of life on Earth before she ever had to deal with Jar Jar Binks. It was late afternoon just before the second Death Star was blown to smithereens, and a few minutes until Earth would suffer the same fate when Ms. Plank showed up at her door. Nick, in his attic, held the bat poised, his eyes fixed on Tesla's mysterious invention stacked before him, and he stepped in to swing. And then a voice behind him said, Nick? He turned to see Mitch standing behind him, as always, clinging to the shut up and listen. He looked troubled for obvious reasons. What are you doing here, Mitch? Nick asked. You should be home with your mom and sister. I was, but this thing, there's something wrong with it. Nick found his frustration, turning to Mitch. Why should that matter now? Mitch shrugged awkwardly. He couldn't look Nick in the eye, and Nick realized that Mitch's presence here had little to do with the object in his hands. Why are you really here, Mitch? Well, I was thinking, you know that bonk thing is made mostly of copper ore, and my father stole 350 truckloads of pennies? I mean, sure, they were virtual pennies, but don't you see the connection? Nick shook his head. Not really. Both our lives were ruined by a whole bunch of copper. There's got to be something to that. It's like, I don't know, God is winking at us? Finally, Nick smiled. I get it, Mitch, he said. In these last 3 minutes, Mitch didn't need his mom or sister. He needed a friend, someone to connect with, identify with. Pennies from heaven, Nick said. Yeah, weird, huh? Nick glanced at the shut up and listened. So what's wrong with it? Watch. Mitch pulled the string and held it. The asteroid headed to Earth. Will? He let the string go, and the device said, Moo. He tried again. The planet Earth is about to oink, oink. And the third time, in less than 20 minutes, everyone on Earth will gobble, gobble, gobble. See, said Mitch, it's broken, and at the worst possible time. Nick considered it, and something tickled the back of his thoughts, something he couldn't quite get at yet. Mitch, he said uncertainly, What would happen if you let the machine speak first? Mitch shrugged and gave it a try. He pulled the string and the machine said, "The cow goes." "Moo," said Mitch. He covered his mouth as if he had unexpectedly burped. "Sorry," he said. "It just came out." "Do it again," insisted Nick. He pulled the string and the machine said, "The pig goes." "Oink, oink," Mitch said. "Hey, stop that," as if Nick was making him do it. Could it be that Mitch had become so connected to the thing that he was finishing its thoughts? What if that connection went deeper? What if this device had given Mitch some sort of link above and beyond anything they could understand? "Again," said Nick. "Keep on going." Mitch pulled the string over and over, letting it begin the sentences, then blurting out the conclusions himself. "The chicken goes cluck. The dog goes woof. The farmer sells his corn at $5.84 per bushel as per today's commodities market." Mitch went wide-eyed at the words coming from his mouth. "How did I know that?" "Keep going," said Nick. Mitch, feeling the power of the moment, had a sudden urge of adrenaline, pulled the string with all his might, and it broke. The dial of the "Shut up and listen" spun itself silent. "Well," said Mitch, "that's that." But Nick wasn't so sure. "The amount of rainfall in Topeka, Kansas, last month was," he began, and Mitch said, "the highest of any city in Kansas." "The Eiffel Tower," began Nick. "Has exactly 347 pieces of used gum stuck to its girder," said Mitch. "The end of the world will come," began Nick, "in 16 minutes and 43 seconds, or in 4.6 billion years." "Bingo," said Nick. "And 42," responded Mitch, "the winning number on the highest bingo jackpot in history." "How do I know these things?" "You don't," Nick told him. Somehow you're channeling the universe. The Shut Up and Listen made you like one of those radio telescopes that can tune in the Big Bang." Mitch nodded in kind of a mental shell shock. "Right," he mumbled. "And that whole thing about us being connected. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's going to take two of us to fix things." "How?" Nick tried to quickly wrap his mind around what he had just learned. There were two options now. Either the world would end in a few minutes, or it would end in a few billion years, like it was supposed to, which meant the Felicity Bonk fiasco could still be avoided. It all depended on the thought he started and Mitch finished. "And so," he said, "the answer to everything," and Mitch responded, "is right in your hands." "Aha! So there is an answer," Nick shouted, "but what does it mean?" "Well," asked Mitch, far more timidly than usual, "what's in your hands?" Nick looked down at the baseball bat that he was indeed still holding. He felt so compelled to swing it and smash Tesla's mad creations. Only now did he notice that it really didn't quite feel like any baseball bat he'd ever held. Its center of gravity was different. It seemed to vibrate with a dormant resonance, like the wood of a guitar moments after the sound of the chord has faded. Was there a place for this item in the incomplete machine before him, or was its purpose separate, still related, but separate, like the way the glove drew celestial object Felicity Bonk toward its rendezvous with Earth? A glove and a bat. A baseball game would not be complete without both. And lots of games are won in the bottom of the ninth. Chapter 24, Pinch Hitter. "Hey, Dad," said Nick, coming downstairs with Mitch. "How about a little baseball before we go?" Nick's father had given up on the stakes and was sitting on the sofa with Danny, his arm around the boy. No music, no TV, no video games. The two were appreciating the mere act of living. The sounds of birds from outside, the dusty smell of the old house, and in the end, Nick supposed everyone would truly come to believe that the best things in life are free. His father looked at him blank-eyed for a moment and then smiled. "Before we go," he repeated. "Yes, Nick, I think that's exactly what we should do." And even Danny, who had not been near baseball since his ill-fated cosmic encounter, agreed. They didn't go to the sports complex. There was no time. Instead, they went to the park just a block away, a grassy field with no baselines and a cheap rollaway backstop. They were the only ones there, of course. Nick looked up to where the asteroid was coming in from high in the eastern sky. Then he checked his watch. 4 minutes to impact, and the thing still appeared smaller than the moon in the sky. You'd think it would look bigger, Mitch said. It's only 50 miles wide, Nick pointed out. He supposed it would grow immense and swallow the sky only in the last seconds before striking. In the field, Nick positioned himself on the pitcher's mound with the looming asteroid behind him. He held the ball signed by every member of the Tampa Bay Rays. Play deep center field, he told Danny and Mitch. But we don't have gloves, Danny said. It doesn't matter, Danny, Mitch told him, and the two ran out to center field. At home plate, Nick's father brandished the bat on his shoulder, and then he said, I love you, Nick. Nick tried to keep his eyes clear, but he found it difficult. I love you too, Dad. And with that, Nick wound up and threw the most important pitch of his life. Newton's third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When a baseball is hit by a powerful force, its reaction to fly out of the ballpark. Its reaction is to fly out of the ballpark. It's simple physics that makes any ball game possible. Whiffin' Wayne, Slate knew this was to be the last at bat of his life, his one chance to redeem himself, to get a piece of the ball. He eyed the asteroid in the sky above his son's head. In defiance of fate, he would swing away and blast that baseball right toward the killer chunk of rock. The determination with which he swung at his son's pitch was unparalleled by any swing of his life. This was his moment. He could feel his entire soul in that swing. And as the bat came around, he waited for the glorious feel of stitched leather against wood. That moment when the ball would connect with the ball. When the bat would connect with the ball. Nick, however, had thrown a curveball, and a good one. The ball headed straight toward his father, then veered right, missing the end of the swinging bat by half an inch. The ball hit the backstop with a rattle and fell to the ground, leaving Whiffin' Wayne's slate sadly unredeemed. But the force of that swing, magnified by the curious nature of that antique bat, had to go somewhere. A shock wave spread out from home plate like a sonic boom, blowing Nick, Danny, and Mitch off their feet. Beyond the park, it shattered windows, but the vast majority of its energy headed skyward. I thought we might have a little chat, you and me, on this lovely afternoon, said Miss Plank, as she stood in Petula's doorway. Petula glared at her. What could there possibly be to talk about? She glanced at her watch, with 4 minutes left to the world. This. Miss Plank held up a 3-foot-long cardboard mailing tube. I'm sorry to tell you this, Petula said, but I think you missed the FedEx cutoff time. Maybe not. May I come in? Petula's parents, at some point during the day, had made up, and now they were making goo-goo eyes at each other at the kitchen table. Not an image Petula wanted to take with her to oblivion, so she closed the door to the kitchen. Miss Plank sat on the sofa where Mitch had kissed Petula a few days earlier. On the coffee table, she rolled out a print of the very picture Petula had taken yesterday. Only this one was 4 feet across and 3 feet high. As with the smaller image, this poster-size one clearly showed the utter destruction that was just a few minutes away. I took the liberty of enlarging your excellent photograph, and look how clear it still is. You can see every texture of flaming rock, every speck of spewing lava. That box camera of yours is quite, shall we say, ahead of its time. Petula crossed her arms. So you figured it out. A big lot of good that does now. Ms. Plank ignored Petula's fatalistic attitude. Tell me, Petula, where did you take this picture? My backyard. Miss Plank nodded. Show me. Petula led her out to the yard full of crabgrass that would never be pulled and dandelions that would never go to seed. Show me where you were standing, Miss Plank said calmly. Why? Petula demanded. Humor me. Petula moved to the spot where she took the picture the day before, and Miss Plank stood about 6 feet in front of her. Then she unrolled a large image of Armageddon, which stretched the full width of her reach. I would bet, said Miss Plank, that at precisely 5:19, this will reflect the scene that your camera is destined to capture. Yeah, so look at your watch, Petula. Petula glanced at her watch to reveal that the time was 5:19. Wait, but I don't understand, Petula stammered, and then she saw Miss Plank's smiling eyes above the oversized image, and the truth hit her with the force of a meteor. I didn't take a picture of the end of the world, Petula said. I took a picture of the end of the world. Petula held up her fingers in a square shape, like a viewfinder. To see the image that the camera would see. The old box camera had indeed taken a picture of this exact moment in time. When you know the future, Miss Plank said, echoing a thought Petula already had, you can either let the future happen to you or be the one to create it. And at that moment, a shock wave hit them with such power it knocked them off their feet and tore the large photograph from Ms. Plank's hands. The photo flew off into the sky like a lost kite. At home plate, Nick's dad looked morosely down at the ball he had missed. He picked it up and sighed. I guess it's true then. Now and forever, I'll always be Whiff and Wayne Slate. Nick came running to him from the pitcher's mound, wearing a huge grin. Mr. Slate marveled at his son's ability to smile at a time like this. Danny ran over a moment later, bewildered, with Mitch close behind. What was that? Danny said. I thought it was the asteroid. If it was, we wouldn't be here, Mitch pointed out. That, said Nick, was a grand slam. In case you didn't notice, I missed the ball, his father said. But the grin didn't leave Nick's face. Then how come the bat is cracked? Mr. Slate looked down, and sure enough, the bat had split lengthwise down the middle. Son of a gun, you're right. The truth didn't quite fall into place until he looked up and saw the asteroid was no longer growing larger. In fact, it seemed slightly smaller and to be slipping sideways across the sky. None of them was willing to speak aloud the thought that something had changed, as if saying it would jinx it. The four of them watched celestial object Felicity Bonk for 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes, then 20, long after it was supposed to have struck Colorado Springs. Mr. Slate picked up the cracked bat. Sometimes bats had illegal cork cores to give them greater hitting power. He had no idea what was in the core of this particular bat, and he suspected he would never know, but in the end it didn't matter. All that mattered was the result. He thought about the events of the past few weeks, the baseball glove that pulled things from the heavens, and now a bat that sent them back. And he marveled. Chapter 25. Things we don't fully understand. When it was clear that the Earth was still here and would remain here indefinitely, people got pissed off. Across the globe, valuable possessions had been given away, and guilty consciences had been purged by shocking confessions, all in the belief that no one would live to regret it. But the astronomers were wrong, and Felicity Bonk turned out to be a fickle lover. For although she had brazenly courted the planet, something had knocked her off the intended path, leaving her in a harmless platonic orbit that barely even affected the tides. The following morning, a national holiday was declared, and a parade was established with the real Felicity Bonk herself riding and waving from the lead float as if she had done anything more than pay $10 for a big rock. By noon, people were already arguing about what to call the day and whether or not it should be shifted to a Monday in future years to create a 3-day weekend. Regardless, Bonk Tuesday, as it was currently called, was sure to be celebrated in one form or another for years to come. But Chula, in spite of resolving not to, called Mitch that morning. I told myself that the world would have to end before I accepted your invitation to the movies, she said. Close enough. Then she gave him the time, place, and movie of her choosing and suggested that a corsage would not be inappropriate. Mitch, however, had other plans. Actually, I'm going to visit my father today, he told her. After what happened yesterday, I've come to appreciate what little time I get with him. What? Said Petula, suitably disgusted. Is your father more important than a date with me? Well, yes, he told her reluctantly, but you're important too. Fine. You will not get another chance. How about Saturday? He agreed, and she hung up on him, feeling frustrated by her own happiness over the matter. That afternoon, Petula joined Miss Plank for a stroll in Acacia Park, where they had first bonded over photography. The thing to keep in mind, Miss Plank said, is that you and I saved the world. How do you figure? Simple, said Miss Plank. Miss Plank explained. If we hadn't intervened with me holding up the enlargement at the precise time and place for you to catch it with the box camera, then your picture of the end of the world would have been the real thing. Thanks to us, it wasn't. I still don't get it, Petula confessed. If the camera took a picture of a picture, where did the original come from? Miss Plank smiled. Ah, I love a good paradox, don't you? They walked on a bit. Think about it when you go to bed, said Petula. It's better than counting sheep. That made Petula smile. It was late afternoon. The sound of children in the playground became distant as they neared Miss Plank's townhouse. In this quiet part of the park, they were very much alone. That's when Miss Plank knelt down in front of Petula. Smiling warmly, she said, I have a gift for you, something very special to commemorate your noble actions. She opened a small jewelry box, revealing a shiny gold pin in the shape of an A, but with a symbol for infinity through the center. Wear this close to your heart, Petula, Miss Plank told her, but don't let anyone see it. What is it? It's a sign that you belong to a very special organization. Petula turned the small pin over in her hands, watching it catch the light. No one had ever given her the gift of jewelry before, unless you count the friendship ring she wore on her pinky. But she had bought that for herself. This organization, is it a secret? Very much so. A group of people wise beyond words, shrewd beyond measure, and destined to steer the course of all mankind. Petula liked the sound of that. So she fastened the pin beneath the collar of her blouse, hidden from view. Thank you, Miss Plank, Petula said. But if you're part of this group, why do you serve us lunch? We're in all walks of life, honey, Miss Plank told her with the slightest of grins. That's how we spot those who belong among us, and how we monitor certain persons of interest. So, said Petula, you're undercover? Miss Plank stood up and continued walking beside her. I prefer to call it hiding in plain sight. Petula could relate, in the sense that she felt she'd been hiding in plain sight all her life, but now it would be with a purpose. She thought about how Nick Slate had humiliated her when all she had tried to do was save him. An icy vein of anger coursed through her. What are you thinking? Asked Miss Plank. I was thinking that success is the best revenge. No, dear, Miss Plank corrected. Revenge is the best revenge, but we'll have plenty of time to discuss such things. Will I meet other members of this club? Petula asked, and find out more about what you do? You will, Miss Plank said. You will. And you can't imagine how thrilling your life is about to become. Only now that the crisis had been averted did Nick's and Caitlin's attention turn to their fallen friend. They sat in Nick's room, Caitlin tearful and Nick nearly so, as they lamented how poor Vince was caught squarely in the wrong place at the wrong time. Although Nick knew that it had been the Accelerati's doing, he couldn't get past the fact that it was his hand that aimed and fired the weapon that killed him. You can't think of it that way, Caitlin said, her voice soothing. If you do, then they win. But Nick just shook his head. It could have been any of us, Caitlin continued. Your father, your brother. I'm supposed to be happy it was Vince instead of them. Or you. It shouldn't have been anyone. Caitlin dropped her shoulders and sighed. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to help. Nick gently touched her knee, a gesture that would have felt terribly awkward a week ago. I know, he said. Thanks. They sat in silence for a moment, pondering Tesla's incomplete device before them. Without all the pieces, Caitlin said, we'll never get it to work. In fact, we'll probably never know exactly what it does. I'm not so sure of that, said Nick. He stood up and approached the odd-looking device, taking it from all angles, as he had done since yesterday. Did you know that the asteroid is made mostly of copper ore? He asked. NASA's already talking about sending up a mining probe. Great, said Caitlin. So what? The thing is, said Nick slowly, I've been thinking. The core of the Earth is mostly iron, right? That's why we have a lot of humongous magnetic field. And you know what happens when you send a bunch of copper spinning around a magnetic field? Caitlin thought for a moment and gasped. It's a generator. One so big it could power the entire world for free. Or for FREE, the Far Range Energy Emitter, Caitlin said. Exactly, the only device that can harness that energy. Nick glanced at Tesla's incomplete electronic puzzle standing in the sweet spot of his room, right beneath the pyramidal skylight, waiting for the rest of his wayward parts. Yet, even incomplete, the machine gave off a sort of electric anticipation. It was as if, somehow, Tesla had planned for all of this. The garage sale, the asteroid, Nick's father, triumphant baseball swing. I know this sounds weird, Nick told Caitlin, but it's like we're all part of this machine. The things we've done, the things we still have to do, they're all connected. He thought Caitlin might think he was nuts, but instead she said, I know exactly what you mean. The ramifications made them both lightheaded. Nick had to sit down on his bed, and when he did, he felt something crinkle beneath his covers. Caitlin smirked. Eating chips in bed? That's where that wasn't a chip. Nick threw back the covers to find a picture. Not of some one, but something, a starscape. I know what that is, said Caitlin. It's the Horsehead Nebula. Nick went slightly pale. The Accelerati! There was no other explanation. They had been out and they had left the Horsehead in his bed as a warning. He turned it over. On the back was a paraphrase of a quote attributed to Accelerati's founder, Thomas Edison. We never do anything by accident. Nick took a deep breath and said to Caitlin, well, neither does Tesla, and neither do I. He crumpled up his photo in his hand. Then he went to the device and he made a decision. No outcome is certain when it seems so. Fates can change with the swing of a bat or the flip of a switch or the closing of a circuit. The somewhat mad genius who had orchestrated the world's potential end and his potential salvation, and all of the potential energy it might ever need know the better than anyone. It all came down to how far you dared to go to accomplish what the world thinks can't be done. And so, taking a lesson from Tesla, Nick knelt down and pulled the wet cell out from the heart of the device because it was needed everywhere. As he tugged it out, the toaster, perched slightly higher, fell, again hitting him on the head. Oh, he said, putting his head to his forehead. Caitlin hurried over to him. Great, Nick said. Just what I need. Another trip to the emergency room. Let me see, Caitlin said, taking his hand and moving it away. Well, it's not bleeding, although you may have a nasty bump. And then she took his head in his hands, leaning forward, and kissed it. There, all better. For a few seconds, Nick felt like he had been knocked off his feet by Tesla's comic bat, but he only smiled. That's much better than medicine than stitches, he told her. Then he stood up and headed for the ladder. Come on. Where are we going? Caitlin asked, standing up. Where do you think? He said. To find Vince. Caitlin glanced at the wet cell in his hands and understood. You can't be serious. Why not? Caitlin stuttered. I mean, it's not like we can keep that thing hooked to him 24/7. Nick shrugged. Why not? And since Caitlin could not find any reasons why not, she shrugged back and said, okay. Besides, it's what Vince always wanted, isn't it? To be unled. He was already something of a zombie. Now it will be official. Shouldn't uh, shouldn't it bother us? Caitlin said as they clattered around the table, messing with life and death and things we don't fully understand. If we fully understood them, said Nick, what would be the point of messing with them? And together, Nick and Caitlin set out into the bright afternoon, their hearts filled with a rare and special joy as they went to reanimate their dead friend.